What's up, everybody? Dana White broke some news last night announcing a few fights for UFC 300. No, unfortunately, he did not give us the big fights, the headliners, but he did give us three pretty interesting matchups, except for one, and I'm going to break those down throughout this video. I'm going to start with Cody Brundage versus Bo Nickal, and as we go, I'll give you a little analysis, breakdown, and an early prediction. But Cody Brundage versus Bo Nickal, I got to be honest, guys, this is a terrible matchup. This is not a very exciting matchup. I know that, they're trying to build Bo Nickal, right? We've seen the blueprint of the UFC whenever they're dealing with guys that have a large following or people that are kind of budding superstars in the making. We know about the wrestling credentials of one Bo Nickal. We know it. I don't need to sit here and harp on that with you. We know Bo Nickal has power in his hands. We saw that in some of it in his most recent fight. I mean, we've seen what Bo Nickal is able to do. The grappling of Bo Nickal, we obviously know about that. The submission game of Bo Nickal is improving. He's training at American Top Team. This guy's training with some of the best guys in the world. I see a very dominant victory coming our way for Bo Nickal. I think that this is domination from start to finish. I think, in the first minute maybe of the first round is where Brundage is probably his most dangerous because, again, Brundage is a bigger guy. He does possess some power. However, I know Brundage has kind of looked at it. He's more or less known for his grappling, his wrestling credentials. However, I think this is just a really bad matchup for Cody Brundage. He's not going to out-wrestle Bo Nickal. That's not going to happen. And if it did, I think we'd all be surprised. He's not going to out-wrestle Bo Nickal. I think the striking, Brundage doesn't have an advantage in the striking. I don't see where he wins this matchup. I'm going Bo Nickal here by first round finish. Whether it's a TKO, maybe he hurts him on the feet. Bo Nickal's got a really good overhand left. We've seen that. And then obviously his submissions are improving as we go. Or maybe this somehow, Brundage is able to survive the onslaught, but I don't think so. I think that we've seen when Brundage is in a little bit of trouble, he tends to not make it the distance in some of these matchups. So I just think that this is I don't want to say a gimme. No fight is a gimme, but this is as close to a gimme as you can get, because in the fight game, anything can happen. So, we always have to factor that in. But on paper, total domination by Bo Nickal. That's kind of what I'm expecting in this matchup. Okay, moving on to Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar, the Boston Bomber. This is a horrible matchup for Aljamain Sterling. And if you haven't seen a video that I made recently, I'll link that down in the description, where I thought we were maybe going to get Max Blessed Holloway and Aljamain Sterling, but I should have known better. The UFC can't stand Aljamain Sterling, man. I know they like Ray Longo and that team out there, and Aljo he seems like a cool dude, but he's, he doesn't have a large fan base. I mean, the guy's getting booed in New Jersey, which is supposed to be his backyard, in a title fight against Henry Cejudo. We know about the grappling of Aljamain Sterling. He's got pretty good wrestling. His submissions, they call him the human backpack for a reason. We've seen what happens if Aljamain Sterling is able to take your back. It's a problem. The problem in this matchup is, how's he going to get to Calvin Kattar's back? Can he do that is going to be the big question. I don't see that happening. Now, there are a couple things that I would like to point out about this matchup, which is Calvin Kattar, yes, he is the bigger guy. He absolutely has the better striking. But he's also been out for an extended period of time from that injury that we saw him suffer, right? I mean, so Calvin Kattar, what kind of, he's up there in age. I think he's about 35 now. What kind of Calvin Kattar do we see when he comes back? If you haven't seen, I have Tyson Chartier on my channel. I like New England Cartel. I'm always rolling with those guys, man. Rob Font and those boys. They're all tremendous fighters. They're all exciting to watch. I expect Calvin Kattar to win this matchup. I think that the UFC is not doing Aljamain Sterling any favors now that belt is gone. I think they forced him, obviously we all know that, to turn around and fight Sean O'Malley very quickly after that Henry Cejudo title fight win. They were trying to get this dude off the throne as soon as they could. They send him up to featherweight, and I just think that a lot of the advantages that Aljamain Sterling had at bantamweight, he does not have at featherweight. He's not bigger than Calvin Kattar. I'm not going to say that he can out-wrestle Calvin Kattar, right? Calvin Kattar, Calvin Kattar has very good takedown defense. Calvin Kattar has good wrestling himself. He doesn't really use it because his striking is really good. And when I say striking, Calvin Kattar is not much of a kicker, right? You're gonna see tremendous boxing, MMA boxing, I should say. When you watch Calvin Kattar fight, he's very good at measuring his opponents. Just the way he's able to gauge distance and range. We've seen that. He kind of, pulls forward with that right hand and then he'll just step in and fire that 1-2. He holds his hands up beautifully. He's got good movement. We've seen him switch stances, and him and Rob Font very much fight very similar, right? They hold that kind of high shell. They kind of move, switch stances, kind of, measure you and start peppering you with that jab. And I just see Calvin Kattar absolutely touching Aljamain Sterling up with that jab. Sterling's entries are not very good. We saw that against Sean O'Malley. Against Sean O'Malley, we saw in that matchup what happens when Aljamain tries to close the distance. And I know Sean O'Malley's a high-level striker, man. We got to give him his due there. Sean O'Malley, he's a sniper. Now, Calvin Kattar, I would like to think probably has more power than Sean O'Malley, right? I think that's fair to say. I'm not going to say Calvin Kattar's the sniper and the same level of striker as a Sean O'Malley, but with the hands, Calvin Kattar's a nightmare, man. We've seen what this guy can do. We've seen his wins over Dan Ige, over Jeremy Stevens, and we've seen what this guy can do, derailing, the hype train of Giga Chikadze. So we've seen what Calvin Kattar can do in matchups where people are kind of like, I don't know, maybe this is the guy to take out Calvin Kattar. A lot of people kind of harp on that Max Holloway loss for Calvin Kattar. That's Max plus Holloway, man. Max Holloway was in like anime Naruto form, just like sick instinct in that fight. I mean, he was just feeling it that night. Maybe Holloway could have beat Volkanovski if that's how, that night. I mean, Max Holloway was on another level, on a different, in a different planet that night when he fought Calvin Kattar. So I don't look too much into that, right? We know Calvin Kattar's durable. We know he's tough. We know he has really good hands and he has good power. The question is, can Aljamain get to his back? I don't know, because there's also the question of Aljamain's not draining himself, so will he perform better? So there's a lot of question marks, but I do favor Calvin Kattar. I will give an early prediction here saying that Calvin Kattar gets the job done here. I don't know if he's able to get Aljamain Sterling out of there. I don't know. I think that's, kind of up for debate. Maybe I'd like to hear what you all think about this matchup, but I can see Aljamain Sterling with a blind entry trying to kind of dive in, and Kattar just slides back and clips him with that right hand. We've seen him do, the elbow that we saw against Jeremy Stevens. We've seen some crazy knockouts when he put Burgos down. We've seen what Calvin Kattar can do. So again, the layoff, some things to factor in, but overall, I think Calvin Kattar gets the job done. Okay, Jiri Prochazka versus Aleksandar Rakic. I don't love this fight. And what I mean by love this fight is, we all like Jiri Prochazka. If you don't like Jiri Prochazka, then I kind of question if you're actually really a fight fan. I mean, Jiri Prochazka, very unpredictable. The samurai way, a true martial artist. The dude's just different, man. He's a unique guy, with the whole thing he's got going on up there with the, he's the samurai spirit is all we can really say. The guy will sit out there and hit a tree for 24 hours apparently and throw the same punch over and over again, sit in a dark room. There's no question that Jiri Prochazka is a unique individual and he is focused. The problem is Aleksandar Rakic has been out for an extended period of time. So anytime someone's out for an extended period of time, we're going off of what we saw the last time they were out. We're not necessarily factoring in if he comes back and doesn't look the same. He comes back and looks slower, looks labored, looks rusty, whatever have you. So we're going to pretend that doesn't happen. I just think this is a bad matchup for Jiri, man. I mean, we look at what happened in the Lex Pineda fight. You can say that, yes, Jiri did land some good shots. Could you say that the fight was potentially stopped a bit soon? Those are all fair things to argue and say. But at the end of the day, he got stopped against Lex Pineda. The Glover Teixeira fight, he's getting touched up big time by Glover Teixeira, and Glover Teixeira was still, killing it, man, at 40-some years of age. But at the end of the day, that's an older Glover Teixeira. Then we're looking at the Dominic Reyes fight where it's like Reyes had some really good moments in the fight. I thought that up until that spinning elbow from Jiri, I thought that Dominic Reyes was doing really well. He might have been winning that fight. And then we just look at, the Volkan Oezdemir fight where he kind of bursts onto the scene with a crazy knockout there where Oezdemir was kind of struggling to find himself, man. After that title fight with DC a while back, ever since Volkan just hasn't been the same guy. So I think when we look at this matchup, Aleksandar Rakic, first of all, the dude's huge, man. I'm going to pull a Rogan. The dude's legs are the size of a freaking tree, and he's able to chop those legs down. We've seen the abilities of Aleksandar Rakic, man. The guy's huge for the weight class. He's a tank. His power is good. There's really no weaknesses in his game, right? I mean, if he doesn't get hurt in that matchup with Jan Blachowicz, what happens there? I mean, I don't know. I wanted to see that fight. You know, it was supposed to be, I think, for UFC 297. They were supposed to do the rematch with Jan Blachowicz and Rakic, but then Blachowicz pulls out, so now they book this matchup. And, you know, we look at what caused Jiri some problems against Poatan, which was the low kicks. Well, Aleksandar Rakic is going to throw low kicks. He doesn't throw the kicks the same way as Poatan, you know, with the non-telegraph and the calf kicks and all those, you know, Rakic is more or less throwing those to the back of the thigh, which you could take more of those, right? I mean, it still hurts, but you could take more of those. To the calf, you can't take too many of those. The calf's a small muscle. We already know about that, the perennial nerve, all the different factors. Jiri just looks stiff in his movement, if I'm being honest, in that matchup with Poatan. I know he was out for a while with the injury, and I just think that this is a bad matchup for Jiri. If Rakic shows up and he looks like the Rakic that we know, this is a bad matchup for Jiri, man. And I think that, you know, I just think that the power difference from Rakic, the leg kicks, I think that, you know, if this fight, you know, it takes place in a close space up against the fence and they're in the clinch, I don't think Jiri has the advantage there. We've seen the elbows from Jiri, but how dominant have we really seen Jiri in the clinch per se, right? I mean, we saw him take down Poatan. He's not going to do that to Rakic. I'd be really surprised if he did. If he sits at range, just some of the unpredictability of Jiri, that's what makes him so dangerous, is those good straight shots that come from the hip out of nowhere. That's his key to victory in this fight. But other than that, I have to lean towards Alexander in this matchup. I think he's a sensational fighter. He's still pretty young. I think that he's a legit contender in the weight class. The dude's huge. So at the end of the day, I'm leaning towards Rakic, man. But what do you all think about these early fight announcements for UFC 300? What are your early predictions for these matchups? Like, subscribe. I appreciate you all, and I will see you in the next one.